Good afternoon and welcome to the remote meeting of the local pension board taking place on Thursday the 11th of March 2021, which is recorded live to the council's website and will be available to be viewed for a minimum of 6 months. Please be aware that any footage from the meeting can be used in subsequent media broadcasts. My name's Councillor Amanda Hopgood and I'll be chairing today's meeting. I'm also joined by board member Ian Densham. I'd like to welcome any members of the public or media who are watching this live feed of the meeting. Before I commence with the formal business on the agenda, I'd like to cover some of the housekeeping issues for us all to follow. If you could please mute your microphone. If you wish to speak, if you can use the chat function on the right hand side and type RTS, which is request to speak. And if you could also remember that everyone in the meeting can see any messages in the chat function. When invited to speak, please remember to unmute your microphone, and once invited to speak, please introduce yourself with your name and position, unless you've already done so earlier on in the meeting. If I have any issues with connectivity, I would ask Council Mr Densham to take over and he will continue as chairing the meeting. If anyone else has problems, if they try turning the video off to keep the live link. Okay, so we can move on to the agenda if that's all right. So Jill, do we have any apologies for absence? Item 1.
Chair, we have an apology from Councillor Fraser Tinsley.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Ian, do you have anyone else have any declarations of interest to declare?
One thing to declare, Ian Densham, scheme member representative, local pension board. I now work as a casual customer service assistant for Tyne and Metro, so therefore I'm an employee of Nexus and therefore a member of the Tyne local government pension scheme as well.
Thanks, Ian. Item 3, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of December. Can I ask if anyone has any questions or comments on the minutes?
There's no comments from myself, Chair.
Okay, so if I propose to move them, oh, sorry, Paul's got a question. He's on mute, Paul.
Sorry, Paul Cooper, Pensions Manager. Chair, do you want me to come in now off the back of one of the actions arising from the minutes on this agenda item?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so at the previous meeting, Ian Densham asked me to provide a record for members of the board of decisions taken by the Pension Fund Committee since during the intervening period between the board's last meeting and the reconvening of the board in December 2020. So the first remote meeting of the Pension Fund Committee was held in June 2020. The decisions taken by the Pension Fund Committee at that meeting were to approve the investment of 15% of the fund's total asset allocation into the Border Coast's Sterling Index-Linked Bond Fund, and to approve the transition into that fund from our existing gilts holdings with Royal London Asset Management. In September, there were no investment decisions made by the committee. Finally, at the December meeting of the committee approved the responsible investment policy and corporate governance and voting guidelines policy operated on the fund's behalf by Border Coast Pension Partnership, and authorised the Corporate Director of Resources to update the fund's ISS accordingly in line with that policy. In December, the Pension Fund Committee also approved the exit policy for the fund relating to exit credits for participating employees who leave the fund, and authorised the Corporate Director of Resources to make any determinations regarding any exit credit that becomes payable in line with that policy. And finally, looking at the investment decisions made, the Pension Fund Committee approved the investment of 15% of the fund's total asset allocation into the Border Coast's MAC subfund, and approved the transition into that fund from our existing holdings with AllianceBernstein. And just to reflect that in advance of all of these decisions, the Pension Fund Committee undertook training supported by officers of the fund, as well as the advisory team from Mercer and Anthony Fletcher, the independent advisor, as well as support from Border Coast Pension Partnership. And speaking to the chair, I thought it might be worth me circulating the training materials from those sessions, so that members of the local pension board can become comfortable that those decisions were made on an informed basis and the training had been undertaken in advance of any of those decisions being made.
Thank you, Paul. Ian, do you have any questions around that?
No questions from myself.
Okay, that's great. And it would be really helpful, I think, if you could circulate that to members of the board. So with regards to that, I'd like to move the minutes. Are you happy to second those, Ian?
Yes, I'm happy to second those.
Thank you. So item number 4 are observations from the Pension Fund Committee. Ian, do you want to say anything from this morning's meeting? Because I know you were there.
No particular observations. Got some good questions asked.
That's good, and I think Paul's covered the fact that there's training being done, so we'll receive that. Do you have anything to comment, Paul or Beverly, from this morning's meeting?
Nothing to add, Chair. There was a number of recommendations for the committee that were all supported by the committee. The decisions were made. Again, committee was supported by advisory team and received presentations also from Border and Coast Pension Partnership to support the kind of ongoing investment in the process of pooling, as well as moving from the sort of design stage of the pooling process into the performance and get some performance numbers through from Border and Coast. So it's good to see that sort of transition away from the early stages into reviewing performance as much as design and build phase.
It was good to see as well that the pension board members were not shy because the normal independent advisor wasn't there, so they made sure that they didn't give his replacement for this meeting an easy ride. So he was asked equally as many questions as Andy would have been had he been there, which was good to see. So moving on to item number 5, communications review. Can I invite Paul to present the report, please?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so the board have a look at the communications approach and policy of the pension fund on an annual basis to make sure that we are effectively communicating with participating employers, with scheme members and other interested parties. I think it's fair to say that the key thrust of our communications strategy over the course of the last year is being linked to the development of online services for members. And certainly I would suggest that that's been a real value add by the pension fund to our members. And I'll draw particular attention to paragraph 8 that reflects the success of our launch to date. So since August, 31st of August, when we launched it, we've had 9,600 scheme members register for the portal, which is a really pleasing proportion of the members that's been launched with. And those members have used what we have supplied. So members can now, instead of coming to my team for estimates and waiting for us to turn that around and send them out in the post, they can run calculations online, and 7,500 calculations have been run. Members have taken the opportunity to update nomination forms, update their personal details. So it has been really well received and utilised by our scheme members, and certainly that's been our key deliverable over the year, particularly in respect of communications. So that's been launched with active members and deferred members, and in April it'll go live with our pensioners who will receive their pension increase letter online for the first time. They have been forewarned about this, and in line with the Occupational Pension Scheme disclosure regulations, we've provided 3 warnings in writing to let members know that the usual written method of communication is moving to online. So we've done that as is required by regulations and make sure members are well informed before we go online, and we'll report back to the board on the success of the launch with pensioners. Welcome any questions from board members.
Ian, do you have any questions?
Slightly more broadly on the communications strategy, you've described the process there of the online portal for scheme members. There's one thought how the strategy also mentions the portal for scheme employers, which could be, is that up and running yet, Paul?
It is, yeah. So
I'm talking about the monthly the monthly portal to
monthly
input
data.
the relevant figures?
Yeah, so we have two strands with employers online. The majority of employers communicate sort of, let's think about sort of transmitting starters, leavers, that kind of information, transmit that electronically through our online portal for employers. And then supplementing that, as you quite rightly highlight, is monthly data collection. Now, as you'd expect, the vast majority of our transactions come from the biggest employer in the fund, which is the host authority, the Durham County Council. So we've launched monthly data collection with Durham, and that's up and running, and we are collecting data on a monthly basis, and we're looking to expand that amongst other participating employers, which we'll be looking to do over the course of the next year.
Yeah, because if we're thinking on that one is because of the situation how hard with COVID, you'll probably have quite a few employers making changes to staffing in various ways, be that redundancies or reduced hours or what have you, which will therefore affect pension contributions for employers, and that the accurate communication of that is pretty essential to the smooth running of the pension scheme. And both strands apply to that, the notification of starters and leavers, and also the monthly data collection as well. So to my mind, the monthly data collection also needs expanding out to all employers as quickly as possible. Bear in mind, bodies such as colleges and things like that will probably be bodies that may well be looking at changes of staffing to balance budgets in the current circumstances.
Yeah, so there's a few strands to that, thinking about kind of monthly data collection as an issue, as well as impacts of COVID. In respect of monthly data collection, yeah, we'll look to expand that largely amongst large employers. You need some economies of scale for it to be worthwhile for onboarding employers, because we have a number of small employers in the fund who, if you're collecting data from them monthly, it's not necessarily worthwhile because they won't necessarily have any changes in a given month. Whereas Durham County Council, we're getting every month, you guarantee that we're going to be getting starters, leavers, changes coming through. So it's worth targeting those bigger employers. Going through the educational process and the time commitment for employers at a smaller level doesn't necessarily tick that box in respect of economies of scale. But certainly where employers are interested, we would work with them on that. In respect of COVID, you're quite right, communications were essential during that period, particularly at the early stages. If we think about March and that first quarter that followed, when there was a lot more uncertainty in the world and we weren't all used to this way of working, we made sure that we communicated with our participating employers proactively, making sure that there was no issues with contributions, with receipt of data, giving employers reassurance around our own processes, that things were functioning at the pension fund, that we were effectively business as usual, and that was successful. Because of the impact of COVID, we ensured that there was an audit of contribution receipt over this year, and we have had that audit result back, and that came back with substantial assurance. And Ashley from my team, who's on the call, led on that area just to make sure that we were even tighter than normal on contributions, just to make sure that the contributions inflows were happening as normal. And then the other strand of COVID impact regards members. I would suggest it's been business as normal for scheme members. Scheme members probably haven't seen a difference in us not being in the office. We offer a telephone helpline service for all scheme members during normal office hours. That's continued. That's not been impacted whatsoever by colleagues working from home. Ashley and her team have facilitated that throughout. We ensured that we had the necessary kit so that the telephone helpline could be answered on a hunt group basis from day one. So that telephone helpline's continued. We were already prepared for home working because the team already had a hybrid model where some days a week members of my team could work from home. So the delivery of payment of pension benefits, payment of death benefits, and the communications that goes with that, the letters, the paperwork, that was all facilitated from home. So members shouldn't probably have even been aware that we were working from home because the service wasn't really interrupted by remote working.
Is there any plans to extend the automatic monthly data collection to Darlington Borough Council as being the other big employer?
I mean, the biggest employers, which you're quite right, Durham and Darlington, it's the biggest employers that we'll be talking to next. So you're right, get that economy of scale, because the investment in time, both at the fund's end and the employer's end and their payroll provider's end, it's not worthwhile for a tiny employer who's not going to send any changes through. But you're quite right, those employers where you're getting repeated transaction month in, month out, monthly data collections, the best way forward.
Just one other question. Some employers may have had staff on furlough, and has the pension scheme had adequate information from their HMRC, Treasury, etc., regarding how that relates to pensions, so it's confident that all its calculations are correct?
So I guess this probably, that point speaks to the dynamic in the LGPS, where there's responsibilities for employers and responsibilities for us as the admin authority. To some extent, that touches upon the responsibilities of a scheme employer. What we did do, because it is an employer issue to determine the pay that should be used in the calculation of someone's benefits, the contributions that should be collected from that pay, and providing that accurate data to us as the pension provider. So it's the employer determination on the pay on which pensions should be based. What we did do was we made sure we communicated with all participating employers so that they were aware of the LGA guidance on furlough. We shared that with all participating employers. We didn't have a great number, we don't think, that would have been operating a furlough scheme, but we did make sure that guidance was shared and understood, and we're happy to take any questions that came off the back of that.
Right, I think that's all I've got to say on that.
Right, thanks, Ian. I've just got one question, Paul. It's around communication with current scheme members that you're rolling out now and online. Have we offered anything for people? Because I'm aware that we may have some scheme members who may not have access to online. I would imagine they're very few and far between, but just to make sure we haven't excluded anyone from getting anything.
Of course, no, you're quite right. Inevitably, there'll be some people who don't have broadband or access to laptops or whatever else. We sent written notifications to members 3 times that we were moving online with the annual benefit statements, which is a key document every year for scheme members. But in each of those 3 notifications, we invited members to opt out if they wish, and members who opt out of the online communication will get a paper copy going forward. So we do have a number of people who have opted out and are receiving paper copies of communications.
Mm-hmm. And will we follow those up? Will we do sort of a catch up in a year or 2 and see if that's still the case, or if they want to move to online to try and get everyone on? Or
yeah, well, probably, I think you're right. I think probably in a couple of years, once we've got, because we didn't have a massive number of opt-outs, which was good. But if that number starts to creep up, then yeah, we'll probably target them with another written communication, highlighting the benefits and asking them if they'd like to change their election from opt-out to opt-in.
Right, that's great, thank you. No more questions on that? So we're happy to accept that report? Yeah. So move on to item number 6. Can I invite Paul to present this report? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So as members of the board will be aware, when the pension fund makes a decision under the LGPS rules, members have the right to appeal that decision, and we have to have a documented process to facilitate that right to appeal, which is known as IDRP, Internal Dispute Resolution Procedure. So we have included as the appendix the written process that's supplied to members when we make a decision. And wanted to highlight to members of the board the kind of volumes that we're getting in respect of appeals and thematically where those appeals occur. So broadly thinking thematically, it is ill health retirements. That's typically where we do get appeals within the LGPS. I would suggest that that's probably typical across funds, and that's because ill health retirement's got quite a high hurdle to achieve. It's not easy to get ill health retirement now. So as a reminder, a scheme member must be permanently incapable of doing their own job and have limited capacity to do any type of work in the future, which means that it's hard to achieve ill health benefits. And if a member's turned down in their application for ill health, then they can appeal. You know, they've got that right to appeal, and that's largely where our appeals come through. Thinking about stage 1 appeals, we had 8 applications in the year, of which 5 were upheld. So the employer's original decision around that ill health determination was upheld, and 3 were referred back to the employer to reconsider. Now, the adjudicator can't direct the employer to change their decision. The adjudicator can direct them, however, to reconsider their decision. So 3 were referred back to the employer to reconsider. And in those cases, 2 remain ongoing, so they're not yet resolved. They're back with employers, and one of those, the employer overturned their decision after taking into account further evidence. In respect of stage 2 appeals, which were both about ill health, continuing on that theme, one of the cases is still ongoing. It's not yet brought to a resolution, but the other one was found in favour of the original decision. The original decision stands, so the employer's ill health decision at stage 2 was found to be the correct one. Finally, we did agree with the local pension board members to keep you up to date with any determinations around the ombudsman. So that's the final stage of appeal. Once stage 1 and 2 have been exhausted by a scheme member, they can refer the matter to the pensions ombudsman. And in the year, we did have one case that was resolved by the ombudsman. So a slightly double-edged sword. This was around a disputed leave date. So the employer had determined a leave date and the pension fund paid the benefits based on that leave date. There's a dispute over the leave date. The ombudsman found in favour of the fund and employer in respect of the date that was used, but there was an award of compensation because of the inconvenience caused to the member.
Thank you. Ian, do you have any questions on this?
No, I've got no questions based on that.
No. So you're happy to note the report?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Over to you again on item number 7.
Thanks, Chair. So the report is largely for noting and really to invite any comments from the board. As board members will be aware, under the LGPS, there are a number of discretions available to both participating employers and admin authority. And the pension board is here to consider the discretions operated by the scheme, the pension fund, as admin authority. The report outlines the admin authority's mandatory discretions, comment on our existing policy as well as the rationale behind why things are done in the way that they are. And overlapping with that is, as you see in Appendix C, are the mandatory written policies that the admin authority must publish. And you'll see that we published the governance compliance statement, which forms part of the annual report. We had an independent review of governance last year that feeds into that as well. So we also published details of the external view of our governance. Fund and strategy statements reviewed every year by the Pension Fund Committee. Committee saw that FSS today. And the communication policy is reviewed annually by yourselves at the local pension board. So broadly, the intention of the report is to give some assurance that discretions, that we do have a written policy as we should on those discretions, that we operate that consistently and fairly, and that there's nothing unusual about the way that we apply those discretions. So I welcome any comments or questions that board members might have.
I don't have any questions other than a comment. It seems robust to me. We've got the mandatory information in there as well as the discretionary that's related to us. Ian, do you have anything?
No questions for myself based on that.
No, thank you, Paul, and I'm happy to note that report.
Yeah.
So that takes us to our item number 8, final item, which is the local pension board annual report. Again, Paul.
Thanks, Chair. I think this one, should be self-explanatory. It reflects the fact that it records that we didn't have board meetings because of COVID, and that we played catch up from December and March to cover off those things that we would have otherwise covered. And this will be fed back to the Pension Fund Committee. I think largely it just gives an overview of the considerations of the board, what the board have reviewed and considered over the course of the year, and reflects that we have had 2 meetings of the pension board, which is in line with the minimum that we prescribe in the terms of reference of the board. And broadly, this is just for any comments from members of the board before this goes to committee next time round.
Ian, anything to add to that?
So no comments on what's been written about the progress of meetings so far. Reading the review, we'll have a work plan for the next 2 years, brought to the meeting in June for board members to agree. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah. So I did discuss this with the chair, and that the LGPS is running a good governance review, which was mentioned in committee this morning. You'll recall in the Pensions Administration report we fed back to the committee about the good governance review. That report's just being published, and it seems like an opportune time to sort of make sure that we tick all the boxes in respect to the good governance review, which is hot off the press, to feed into the work plan for the board, which we'll bring in June, as well as if there's any changes in the composition of the board, any new members of the board might have some input into that before we set something in stone for the next 2 years. So yeah, we'll bring that in June, and members of the board will have opportunity to comment on that and steer us in any direction if you think there's anything further that we should be considering.
Yeah, no, I've got no questions. I was just going to add what Paul's already said. It makes sense on both accounts, especially given that there are elections, so the board members may well change. And I think it's important that the new board members, if they are new board members, have ownership of the work plan for the next 2 years. So it makes sense to set it in June when we know what the committee is going to look like for the next 4 years. Okay, so I'm happy to approve that. Are you happy with that then, Ian?
Just a question in terms of the frequency of the board meetings going forward. Will those remain at the same frequency?
Yes. My understanding is the will. Is that right, Paul? Yep. I'll continue. And I think it does make sense that we have them on the afternoon following the pension fund committee. I don't see the need to change something that works.
Yeah, I don't have any particular thoughts on whether or not that should change, or except it's I don't see a problem with it. Just to clarify what was in the document.
Yeah. Thanks, Ian. Right, so we'll agree that. I believe we don't have a date yet for the next meeting in June because the new diary isn't out. That needs to wait for the full council. Is that right, Jill?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so that will, as soon as we've got a date, that will be issued to members. Does anyone have any items of any other business? I think the items that we were talking about have already been covered that I was aware of. Ian, have you got anything?
Just one comment, which more relates back to the pension fund committee rather than a local pension board. It was mentioned that the elections are coming up in April, I think it was mentioned. Was it May? That may affect the composition of the pension fund committee. Just if any change over the period, with a large number of the committee members changing, there might be a potential for like a sort of a committee loss in knowledge. There's people that's been doing it around cease to be members of that committee potentially, and just it might be is that sort of thing on the risk register for the pension fund committee? The potential loss of knowledge and changeovers at local election times.
Yeah, that will be reflected in the risk register and the considerations of both the committee and officers of the fund. And I guess just to give some assurance to members of the board that we'll be arranging training for any new members of the committee as we always do. So there's an onboarding process before anyone sits on the committee and makes any investment decisions. There's a training programme to go through. And that we do have the continuing support of the advisory team who's, there's the depth of knowledge there and knowledge of the individual fund with Mercer. And we've recently, it's only in the last year, 18 months, perhaps 2 years, that we've added the independent advisor. So that's supplementing the knowledge within the fund and the support that's available to members. But yeah, to address your point, we will make sure that there's training for any new members of the committee before they take part in any investment decisions.
Chair, I'm saying chair, I'm the chair. Paul, on that note, we do know that the chair of the pension fund committee won't be the chair because he isn't really standing, and he said that today. So can we make sure that there is specific training for the chair, the new incoming chair, whoever that may be, because it's more now than just chairing the meeting, because they are our representative on the board at the coast. So I think that it's really essential that that's in place, and I'm sure you've already thought of it, but
Yeah, I mean, the only comment would just be to agree with you, Chair, that yeah, there's that dual role as an investment client and a shareholder in the company.
yeah, okay, right. On that note, I believe we're finished unless anyone's got anything else to add.
There's no further comments from myself.
Right, in that case, thank you, and that concludes the business. Before the broadcast ends, I'd like to thank those members of the public and the media who've watched the meeting. So if we could all mute, it should finish in about 30 seconds. Thank you.